that take me to the right place? Yes, it does. Okay. That's a little odd. We go here. All right. And y'all just got pinged on Twitter. Maybe twice.
Yeah. Can't believe you've done this.
All right. Welcome, everybody. Top level Turf War is correct. I don't think you guys understand like how high level this is about to be, considering this is solo queue Turf War. But we are joined here by a member of Last Resort. In case you don't know Last Resort, if you know Pro Chara, it's his team. So that's Kiwi here. And we are also joined by KBot, who is a very long time member of the Splatoon community, very invaluable for his work as a tournament organizer, also a very good analyst and commentator. And he's joining us to help lend some extra perspective on what we're seeing in Kiwi's games here. So, first of all, Kiwi, tell us a little bit about your goals with Turf War here and why it is that we're talking about solo queue Turf War.
So, I'm grinding for the leaderboards in the next Splatfest, and I'm gonna get like top 10 if I can. So, and I have to be like really consistent in not losing if I want to get a high power in the leaderboards.
Right, because Turf War, it's kind of insane that, like, despite, you know, all of this about the competitive community not being as much about Turf War, and granted that's different in different places, you know, Japan takes it a lot more seriously, I think, than North America does, but despite all of that talk about it, it's actually probably the single most difficult solo queue achievement that you can gain, short of maybe going for like a 3k X power or something in Splatoon 2, because the freshness meter on Turf War is actually really, really punishing once you get into the higher levels of freshness. You have to be winning like 3 out of every 4 matches or something like that to be sustaining growth in that meter. Do you know off the top of your head like how many points you lose for a loss at like 90 freshness? Is it 4? Is it 5?
Above 50, you lose 3 per loss.
Okay, and it just stays that way?
Yeah, until you... Pretty much, yeah.
All right. So for every 3 games you win, that equals 1 game you lose. So you need better than a 75% win rate to ever climb at that level. And consider just the statistical difficulty of that. When the system is kind of, you can think about it as being designed to produce matches that give you a 50-50 win rate. Like, in order to do something like this, you've got to just be better than everyone the system can match you with at that time, frankly. And so that's what Kiwi's going for. And I think it's a really interesting challenge to give yourself. Definitely a little bit out there, and it'll force us to think about the game in some different ways. But like we've talked about, you know, some issues with Turf War and competitive play, but I don't want to undersell how difficult this is that Kiwi is attempting and how cool it is that they've invited us to be a part of it. So let's talk first a little bit about Turf War in the general sense, because I definitely would love to pick both of you guys' brains about how the game is played at a top level. We can talk, you know, in the general case. Obviously, coordination makes it so that certain ideas for how the game is supposed to work are a little bit more difficult to execute on. But I tackled this in a video a while back called about the inking base controversy. You guys know what I'm talking about? Where people on Twitter were just getting really mad at each other for not inking base. I decided to weigh in on that because it was a popular topic at the time. And you have something to mention about that, KBot?
I was just about to make a joke that when are people not arguing with each other on Twitter? That's
Also,
a pretty commonplace.
Also true, yes. But it's the there's a flavor of the month sometimes about what people are
Right.
arguing with
Right.
with each other about on Twitter. There's some significance attributed to what we're angry about. Our anger never dies; it's just what fuel we give it. So anyway, there was this conversation about, and the idea, the gist of it, for those who don't understand what I'm talking about, is this. That a lot of the time in a Turf War match, you'll end up in a situation where your team has not painted all of the turf that is in your base, like right outside of your spawn. And as a result of that, despite the fact that you're, holding the team fairly even in fights, when it comes down to the final calculation, that turf isn't counting in your favor, and you lose the game for that. That's sort of the pattern that people are identifying, and people were commenting on that. And at the time, I weighed in on it saying that, okay, yes, the base needs to be painted at some point, but it should not be painted at the expense of mid-control. And then I went and watched a Koshin tournament from a little while back that I think Soren was VOD reviewing, maybe like 9 months ago or something. And first thing that happens in that match, 2 players sit back in the base, spend 25 seconds painting the whole thing. And that just kind of blew my mind and did not make a lot of sense to me at the time. So I've come around to a couple of conclusions about this, but first I'd like to hear what each of you guys think about the general flow of the game in Turf War, like from minute to minute, because it is the mode where everything is scheduled. There's probably going to be a fight between 30 and 45 seconds left in the match, because that fight gives you kind of control over the rest of the map. And so leading up to, the end of the game, leading up to the point where you need the most turf down on the ground, like, in an ideal world, what do you guys think a team does to prepare for the end of the game and be most in the lead? We'll start with KBot. What do you think about the general game plan for Turf War?
I mean, to your point about, so to explain the paradox, which might have confused some people in chat, I think, or to try to find an answer here, your point about not trying to sacrifice mid-control, I think, is the main point to emphasize. The fact of the matter is, mid-control is going to be more important as the game goes on, right? Having mid-control with 1 minute left in the game is much more, like, infinitely more valuable than having mid-control 2 minutes and 30 seconds into the game. And we all know with how Splatoon works that it's most likely that one team is not going to go up there and sit on mid for half the game, right? That's not going to happen most of the time. So to your point about, these Japanese players might have been rushing to go paint base right away, that's all well and good, and they're probably thinking that they can get away with it because getting mid-control super early on isn't going to be as valuable. That said, there's also the comment of bringing it up, okay, well, you can, use that for special paints later in the match as things keep progressing. And the other caveat I will say, Jim likes to think that I'm an expert. I don't think I'm an expert. I just question things. And on that note, I have barely watched a lick of Splatoon 3 Turf War, especially at a high level. And the other interesting thing is that I think that there are differences in even like Splat zones in terms of how it's played and how things are, and at least in terms of what I'm observing right now. So I don't know how these will translate into Turf War, but what I will say is that obviously, mid control is going to be that much more beneficial as you're posturing for that fight at the 30-second mark, right? Whatever is going to happen there is ultimately going to decide the game. It's one Splat zone's engagement or defense that is going to ultimately decide your team the game, to find that equivalent, right? And so gearing up all of your resources to be in the right position at the right time for that is important. But with Splatoon, you don't need to be thinking about that fight starting like within the first minute of the match, right? It's probably not worthwhile because the game state's going to change and develop and all of these sorts of things. So it'll be interesting to kind of try to pick apart here as we start to watch, but I think trying to figure out exactly the level of focus that you should have on whatever's going on at that time is important, because the back of your head should say mid control is important. Once we get like starting at like 2 minutes left, it's like, okay, we should really make sure that we're trying to set ourselves up so that we have mid control, and setting ourselves up to a point where the enemy team is not going to be able to easily engage us and easily wipe us in another minute and a half, what have you. So I think those are the most important things. And solo queue obviously makes that difficult, because you are randomly thrown into a composition of 4 weapons, randomly thrown against an enemy team of 4 weapons. And all of that is going to contextually change depending on what weapons are being played, what special weapons are being played, what map you're on, and all of these sorts of things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely agree with the idea that it increases in importance as time goes on, and that, you know, my experience with, you know, playing against top level teams in Turf War has often shown that they're able to lock out fairly indefinitely against lower level teams. But you're right that it's very unlikely that a team is able to hold mid control for the entire duration of the game. You know, even the best teams on Earth, like we saw a couple of matches in PAX West, the invitational tournament right before Splatoon 3's launch, where a team was in control for 2 minutes, for 2.5 minutes, just absolutely dominant in exactly the right positions. One thing fell through in the last 20 seconds and they lost. And so with that in mind, Kiwi, how would you describe, you know, your thoughts on your game planning? Because you specifically are playing this on the Splash-O-Matic, so maybe that plays into it a little bit more specifically. But also, in general, what are your thoughts on Turf War? Do you agree with what's been said so far? Are there things you would add? Like, how would you like to weigh in on that?
I would generally agree. When I approach Turf War, I value mid control more than anything. It's so much easier to hold mid than trying to retake it. I usually try to have mid control by the minute and 30 mark. And the reason why I pick Splash is because it has Crab, and it allows me to hold down mid a lot easier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Crab has been really highly prioritized in the meta lately. FLC was breaking down a match recently where he was talking about, it was Clamblitz Eel Tail. And he was like, okay, the win condition is, can you get a crab on this bridge? and that's basically how it played out. Once you could get a crab up on that bridge, you're able to just lock down the entire zone around the basket for about 10 seconds. And that's enough to just kind of win the game, get a really, really strong push, or set up a sort of spawn lock situation where you can keep funneling clams back into the push. Like, that was all it really took. And I imagine there are similar points, given especially how many choke points there are in Splatoon 3 maps. There are a lot of points where a crab can just sit there and be really, really difficult to dislodge, especially with a team set up around it. And mid would give you vision of everything you'd need to see or shoot. It would give you sight lines on anyone who could try to approach you. So that seems like a really solid plan to me. But we've got a couple of matches that Kiwi has specifically picked out that we want to go over here. And so we're going to start here on Eel Tail, actually.
There we go. Like
these are like matches I specifically lost on, so I can.
All right. Because remember, the loss is worth 3 wins, so every one of these, you know, Kiwi is going to look at these and think, how could we have gotten more value? How could we have fixed this? So let's look at team comps first. We've got a Splash, we've got a 52, so a couple short-range shooters that are going to have a little bit of pushing power. We've got a Reflux, which... And I'm curious to pick you guys' brains a little bit on the Reflux. My take on it right now is that I am not convinced that there is enough, like, combat potential in the main weapon alone that it can carry... Like, I feel like a weapon needs to have some combination of combat potential, paint, and, let's say, like, range maybe. Pushing power maybe would be a better way to put it. Like maybe anchor potential, painting potential, and something else. Like it needs to have more than just one strength, I feel. Like the Aerospray MG, for example, in Splatoon 2, the bomb rush one. It had this really, really fast bomb rush, and that was a strength of the weapon, and it painted a lot. But I always felt like that wasn't enough of an advantage to make it viable in most cases. I felt like the combat was so much weaker that it didn't enable that weapon to do as much as it could have, even if it were as good at fighting as something like a junior. And I feel like a Reflux is sort of in a similar place where the curling bomb doesn't allow it to have a lot of poking potential. It's really reliant on the main weapon for doing anything combat oriented. And the missiles are great, and the missile output is great. But again, it feels like it's in that sort of Aerospray area where it just doesn't quite do enough for the weapon, and you'd prefer other missile weapons in a competitive environment. Do you agree with that, first of all?
The other missile weapons in question are Flingza Roller and Goo Tuber. Now, both of those, like, in my opinion, I haven't watched or picked apart enough of Flingza gameplay either to fully have a full opinion. But I don't think, and I don't believe that a Flingza Roller is going to have a larger amount of slaying potential than a Reflux. I feel like in a lot of ways it's probably personal preference if you're looking for a missile bot, which frankly is probably what most players are playing a Reflux or a Flingza for anyway. If it had a different special weapon, it probably wouldn't be used at all. So on paper, I think it's probably personal preference. This player probably is like, oh yeah, I'm going to pick the Reflux because I'd rather play Reflux today. And they're not thinking about it much because it's Turf War. Bear that in mind.
For sure.
But the like, it's probably a personal preference in terms of how you actually want to paint the map, whether you want to paint it with the Reflux or whether you want to paint it with the Flingza, because both of these weapons are going to fill incredibly similar roles where they're looking for maybe slight amounts of chip damage and trying to pair up and enable the frontline slayers to actually get the jobs done. So it's probably personal preference, and most people will probably have more experience with a Flingza than a Reflux, seeing as how the Reflux has only been out for 2 months.
Yeah, and that's something that I'm keeping an eye on, because there are a lot of weapons that can be pushed in the meantime. And who knows, maybe someone realizes, like, wait, if you just aim good, then Reflux good. But my take on Flingza is that, yeah, most of the time it's just going to favor painting, but it can also just do splat roller things if it really wants to. Like, it can play that more aggressive sharking role if that's what its team needs of it at that time. And I don't see an equivalent for that in Reflux gameplay. Reflux seems like a tri-stringer that doesn't have explosions at the end, where it's just like a little bit too aim-intensive to be especially reliable at hitting those kinds of one-shots. It's even harder to get the one-shots than it is on something like a Charger. So that was my take on that. But
yeah, I think theoretically true, but I don't think in the Flingza gameplay I've watched, what was it, yesterday we blitzed through a lot of the area cup VODs for English rebroadcast. I don't think, like, on paper I think you're right, but I don't think I've seen that sort of a thing put into practice once, because the front lines of the Flingza are just are the two splashes that can just sit there and do the sharking themselves. I don't think they really need the help of in fact, if anything, the Flingza needs to play more back, because they're dealing with double splash plus machine or something like that, right? So in fact, it's the Flingza's role to actually play more back. And I think in that world, maybe you're like, okay, well, on Splat Zones, Ink Mine might be nicer, as opposed to a curling bomb, but also, like, I doubt that the sub weapon is meaningful in that decision. So I don't know. I mean,
they're both pretty cruddy sub weapons for both weapons.
Yeah, right. I don't know that it would matter either way, but maybe that's also my ignorance in terms of, like, actually watching or picking apart either weapons playstyle.
Yeah. And I know, Kiwi, that this is a little bit off topic for, what you're here for, which is looking at your gameplay and analyzing that. But do you have, like, a general stance on that conversation?
I would agree on your take on Reflux. It's not really good at holding mid, which is, like, a big priority in Turf War. Another problem it has, it steals too much ink from its teammates for other people to get specials.
That's an interesting way to think about it. Because that for, to contextualize that comment, especially at high level, special output is really important for, maintaining control of the map, for winning fights, things like that. Things that give you advantages that you can use to establish control. And so you actually optimize in some cases by not painting the map, because painting the map in that location does not give you enough of a strategic advantage to outweigh the fact that if you have special already, your teammate doesn't get to use that to charge another special, or you don't get to use that to charge another special until you've popped your own. And so in some cases, like, you can actually look at a weapon as a turf hog, as something that's painting too much. And that actually does provide some niche disadvantages. So, all right, I'm glad to have gotten you guys' opinion on that. And my thinking here is that you do have a solid front line on your team, and that you've got a 52 plus the splash, and the two of you working together should be able to gain a lot of ground together. And one nice thing about having the reflux is that you're going to have higher missile output than any other weapon in the game. And so even though it's not going to be that much of an impact with its main weapon or its sub or anything like that, the missiles will periodically be coming in on a, cyclically on a periodic basis, and helping the front lines with fights. And then we've also got a Splatana Stamper. Lots of people are interested in this weapon and are working on figuring it out at the moment. I don't have an amazing handle on how it works because I haven't played enough with it myself yet, but my best understanding right now is that it's leaning a lot more towards the Slayer archetype than I was expecting it was going to early on. I thought this was going to be a zoning weapon. I thought this was just going to be another rapid blaster. But it feels like people are actually using this to finish kills, to like watch what fights are happening and then put lethal damage on that spot. From its range, from its ability to one-shot at melee range for the Zipcaster with the burst bomb, to actually be getting lethal damage out from a longer distance away. So that's been my understanding of it. One thing that seems like an immediate challenge for this team comp is the Explo. The Explo is something which, if it's allowed to stay at a range that it likes, you don't have any range to contest it with. So even if it were to expose itself around, a sight line that you could hit with something like a charger, the only thing that's got the range to deal with that is a crab tank. So it's going to be a lot of like bombarding it and using missiles to try and dislodge that, because that otherwise might be like a little bit of an overwhelming problem for such a short range team comp. Yes, KBot?
Missiles, whale, Zipcaster. I mean, every special, if you're trying to focus a Six-Watcher, will probably be able to displace it, and actually might be able to net a kill if used properly. Like probably most notably Zipcaster, but whale also as well, right, on the 52. So obviously the Explosion is probably going to have a decent amount of pain output, but if it is targeted and constantly harassed, then it probably isn't going to be able to set up shop and put out a ton of pressure. Especially, I mean, maybe we'll start to see the Explo machine pair up a little bit, but that's the other thing, is that the Explosher isn't going to be able to really do a lot of devastating kills. It'll just be able to get a little bit of chip damage and try to hope there's follow-up from the rest of the team, but it doesn't look like there is, at least on paper right away. I forget off memory, is Sploosh's curling bomb as well?
Yeah, curling bomb hammer.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, like it's not like there's a splash on the other team that also has a burst bomb to combo with the Explo or something like that. So we'll see how it actually ends up playing, but I don't know if it'll have. Obviously, Kiwi knows whether or not the Explo has an impact.
Yeah, we're sitting here like theorizing about what might happen when this is a pre-recorded match that has a definite result already. Right. But all right, let's get into this and see what happens. So something that I've noticed in all of your matches, Kiwi, is that you start by very meticulously painting your side of the base. And this is in keeping largely with what we saw in the top-level Japanese play, where they're spending the first, little bit of time when mid control isn't as important, making sure to get these tiny corners of the base that are probably not going to be touched by the enemy team. What's your thought process on how long you're trying to do this? Like, what is a sort of like guideline for how much time you spend on this?
Generally, I want to spend like 20 to 30 seconds painting like a certain section of spawn. And by the time I get to mid, I usually want to have a grab so I can easily retake it if there's people there, or to hold it.
Okay. And that makes sense time-wise, because while 20 seconds or 25 seconds or 30 seconds is a long time for getting one special out, we have to remember that this is very meticulous painting. This is not the kind of painting that's going to net you special charges quickly, because instead of spraying around and leaving a lot of blank spots, which is optimal for getting special, you're trying to get perfect map coverage in all of these spots. So, like, painting this tiny area that you're looking at right now is going to get you better coverage, but it's not going to paint much for special. And also, part of the time we're factoring in here is that you're having to travel to mid, which on maps as long as they are in Splatoon 3 often takes like 10 seconds. It's like almost a full respawn timer. So
Eel Tail's rough for that.
Mm-hmm.
One of the interesting things is that a lot of the Splatoon 3 maps, you can keep it playing, a lot of the Splatoon 3 maps seem much larger than their Splatoon 2 counterparts in Splatoon 3. Inklet, very tight quarters. Mako, very tight quarters. Meanwhile, Eel Tail, incredibly large. Undertow, incredibly large. A lot of these, even like some of the maps that came back, right, like Museum, are kind of a little bit more open in nature. So interesting to see how all of that's going to play in here as well.
Yeah, for sure. So interesting to note a couple of things here. First of all, we are still leaving part of this around our base painted, which I think makes a lot of sense, because that's about enough paint that you can get a special out of it. And something that Chara has talked about before is leaving a little bit of base there in case you need an emergency special to get yourself out of a spawn lock situation. So nice little bit of insurance there. And you have to assume at some point in a 3-minute game of Splatoon, somebody is going to get sent back to spawn, and that's going to end up getting painted eventually. So not a big problem there. And so now we're checking map, and we're going in and starting to look for a mid contest. Another advantage that the Splash is going to have in this situation when it's trying to go for that base paint is that it's going to paint very evenly. It has pretty great ink coverage with its combination of fire rate and the size of its shots as they land. So that's going to make it a little bit easier to cover up those spots than you would, be able to do with something like a Jet Squelcher, which has such a slow fire rate that it's going to take forever to get all of those spots. So Burst Bomb here checks this angle to make sure that nobody can be peeking them as they come around the corner. And then we also check this corner directly to make sure that there's nobody hiding there. It's pretty standard defensive play.
The one thing I will say that I really like so far is this position you might think is pretty far back, because we've just spent like the past, I don't even know how long, talking about how important mid control is. But in fact, Splash actually probably wants to play from this position because it is very safe to pop Crab Tank whenever you want, once you get it, right? Splash playing very much further back is actually incredibly valuable, because then you'll have the Crab Tank at your ready, as opposed to just diving in and trying to go for picks all of the time. So, I like this from this position. You're not actually going too far forward. You're not going underneath the bridge. You're kind of just like hanging out in this area, and you're able to adopt at whatever the enemy team does. And it turns out they're the ones that try to strike first, including your two teammates that go down earlier, and now this sploosh starting to approach.
Mm-hmm. And this gives you, the ability to back up. You're going to save the Crab Tank if the fight goes poorly and your teammates go down. But if you had gotten a chance to use the Crab Tank aggressively, you've got the ability to push up over the top right. You've got the ability to look down on anybody in this radius from mid. So that does give you a lot of options.
My idea was to check the bottom and then go to bridge to contest bridge.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because again, like we were talking about with, we mentioned Clam Blitz earlier, but really, that bridge is a feature of every Eel Tail map to varying degrees of importance. And a crab tank on the enemy bridge is kind of a GG moment for the next 30 seconds or so. So that's definitely, I think, an objective worth vying for. So you take out the hammer because they just run straight at you and don't stop and don't turn and just, like, I don't know. Hammer is pretty linear when you're just trying to smash it on the ground, and very easy to flank, especially for a weapon as maneuverable as the Splash is. And then you see your teammate getting engaged on, and this is something that I'm seeing in a lot of, like, especially, like, maybe S rank or lower, or even low-level competitive play. Something I want to point out about this that's not going to be especially novel to Kiwi is Kiwi is paying attention to other fights that are happening on the map. As soon as their teammate is engaged, they're immediately having an impact on that fight as soon as they possibly can, in whatever way they can. Yeah, you're not in a position to be able to shoot them with the main weapon from here, but you have burst bombs. So just chuck a burst bomb over there, and that might save your teammate's life.
And if this was a better angle, you'd have the ability to use Crab Tank here too. Now, you're not going to literally use it right now, especially now that the Exploser just popped out, because now you'd have to fire in 2 different directions at once, and they're very likely going to be able to collapse around you easily. But to that point, right, if you're sitting pretty far back and there's a teammate that's getting engaged on from this position or from a different position on a different map where things are a little bit more open, if you're not in range, you still have that Crab Tank at your disposal.
Mm-hmm.
One of the reasons why this thing is so bloody strong.
Yeah. And also, if you happen to hit a direct on the burst bomb, a second direct just kills. So,
right.
If you're in range to hit it with a burst bomb, like, you are really scary. And at top level, with people that mechanically strong, that's not an option that you want to entirely disregard. It's a bit of an awkward angle for Kiwi to be hitting these burst bombs, though, as they're having to hit up over a bridge, and there's a little bit of cover on that bridge, and the player is now aware of their presence. So we just back that up a little bit. And burst bombs are also phenomenal for painting walls, like you just saw. They just cover so much of that wall, and that'll make it a lot easier to climb up for the teammates later. And this is also, I really love how fast the Crab Tank is popped here. Just, like, so little warning before shots are already landing. You're not getting up here, figuring out where the targets are, and then popping it, and then getting your aim on. The whole thing happens in one fluid motion.
I'd be lying if I knew all of the map geometry here, but it seems like a pretty safe spot. Now this drop is going to be problematic, though, because there's already, like, the easiest thing to describe anytime that I'm watching, like, for positioning, it's literally just who has turf where, right? If there is turf, there is not likely, but there's always a probability that there's going to be a player in the vicinity, right? So in this instance here, where you're noticing that there's a decent amount of blue turf, you might not be confident that you're safe, right? And so it's a probabilistic thing, right? Where you have to be like, okay, well, how likely is it that there's actually a player around here? Sometimes it could be pretty likely, but you can never be 100% confident unless there is no blue ink on the map, right? So considering those sorts of things before you elect to drop or elect to move in a certain way, crab tank or no crab tank is important.
Yeah, and I'm assuming here, because it looks like Kiwi is actually targeting this player directly as they drop and that they're going for the kill on them. But that is definitely important in the general case, I would say, because I put out a TikTok a while back where I posed a question on several different clips, and the question was, this player is about to drop off a ledge into enemy ink. What do you think is going to happen? And in every single instance, that player was down in 5 seconds. Now, this isn't like entirely enemy ink or anything, and you do have a special active, but pushing forward here does really make your play dependent on getting the pick on this player. And so, it makes some sense to me if you look at this fight and you go, this is a good fight, I just missed, and I just need to miss less. Like, that's a possible solution, I think, to this engagement, because there's only one player here. You know exactly where they are. They've already fired shots at you, and you might have some initiative on them. But it's also, there's something to consider. Yes, there was a bomb behind you, and so I guess maybe you were worried about being in its lethal range by staying up here. But I think you'd probably sit on the edge here and keep your height advantage and keep their inability to headshot you from here. And not have to maneuver the crab awkwardly in a position where they have more maneuverability.
Admittedly, it's a risk-reward play that you're going for here, and we're 45 seconds into the game, so kind of who cares? Because something's going to happen, and this play is going to be meaningless when it's going to matter most. So it doesn't matter that much, right? But worth just pointing out and talking about a little.
Because that's something that when you're VOD reviewing gameplay, you always want to think about, when did I die? What could I have done to not die? And that's one of the perennial questions that gets you thinking in stronger ways about your micro game, your positioning, or even even sometimes the macro game. Because sometimes you can look at this and be like, my death actually was helpful there, because the rest of my team was able to do stuff around that, because I got a pick before I went down and damaged another player that my teammate was able to clean up completely cleanly, and now we have a 3 for 2 numbers advantage. So it definitely is a really good question, and I get the question a lot, like, okay, I can watch my matches, but like, what should I be looking for? I can't break the game down the same way. One of the easiest questions that I can tell you is just think, why did I die there? And usually the answer comes from maybe 5, even 10 seconds earlier. A lot of the time it's based on where you're positioning. It's based on not collecting certain pieces of information. In this case, it was a lot sooner, that the decision was made that ended up with us being splatted here. But those kinds of questions often lead you in the right direction towards understanding what you could be improving about your gameplay. So we opt to jump in here, and I think that makes a lot of sense, because you've got so much of your base painted that if you were to try and swim out and paint your way out, you're not going to get anything done there. Like, everything has already been taken care of. Might as well just get right into the action as long as there's a safe jump there. And you do get in safely enough. You're behind cover back here. And you're immediately turning your attention to an ouch. Every ouch ping is something that you as a player should always consider. We see the X show up on screen here, and this also is a moment in the game when you're super jumping where you're able to just collect a lot of information. And so we're noticing this ouch ping over here, and even before we land on the ground, that is immediately our center of attention. There's also a Trizuka that's hitting us there. So I like that we maintain stealth the entire time before we start firing shots. Like, we're not trying to paint our feet over here. We know that the Zuka will probably have smoke screened us a little bit, and that they can't see too high up over this ledge, so they probably don't know where we are, and that gives us the opportunity to get into a position where we're going to be able to take this fight in an advantageous way, where they don't know where we are, instead of them being able to play off knowing our positions before the fight starts. So Booyah Bomb takes this player out on the right-hand side. And at this point, is our objective still to take bridge, Kiwi? Or are we, like, just trying to play a little back and give jumps? Like, how is your game plan shifting now that we're, a minute into the game and we're trying to push our way back into mid?
I'm trying to salvage my way back into mid. Hopefully if they push too far forward, I can possibly get a few picks to find my way back in.
Okay.
I'm a bit too far from crab, so it might not be an option for me to farm it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Like, with a player right in front of you right here and your gauge where it is, this is more a situation where we need to wait for them to make the first move. And this is something where it's nice to have the option to do this every now and then. Like, I used to play on a comp with a Hydra player, and it always felt like we did our best when we just waited for the enemy team to feed into the Hydra. And we waited for them to push too far forward to where we could punish that, rather than trying to make the fight happen ourselves. And while you, as an aggressive weapon, have the ability to push in, given the right circumstances, sometimes it might just be the right option to let them feed into you, even when you have even numbers. Because you may not have map control, you may not have access to the right side of the map without giving your position away, and you're weighing those odds. And also you have the option to shark. Sorry, go ahead.
Especially in solo queue, it's more likely to happen.
Yeah.
On this note as well, Eel Tail is like a generally narrow map. Obviously, there's interesting geometry, but generally, like, I feel like both the reflux and the splash are going to be able to cover pretty much every angle and set up a wall such that they'll know if somebody else tries to drop like off of bridge or tries to come underneath the bridge. You'll know pretty easily whether or not there's a player that is trying to approach. And so playing a little bit more defensively would be nice. I'm wondering if you decide to rotate up over to cover the right side of the map, so just since the reflux isn't going to be able to reach that far, just so that the two of you are separated, now that the two of you know that you're the only two up right now. Yeah.
That fight, it felt like you were like really interested in getting the pick. I think this is the splatter shot base. Oh yeah, it has to be the splatter shot. Yeah. But yeah, so they outrange you a little bit, and so I'm a little worried about this because you're sharking close to them, which is like something you have to do to get in range, and that's just a disadvantage of the weapon in this particular matchup. But as you do that, that often leads to your escape routes being cut off because they're painting, and they may not understand like what they're doing, but now you're on a very linear track. And so if you're going to engage on this fight, if you're going to win it, you need to be hitting your shots right away. And as soon as we start missing a little bit, even though this player isn't able to beat you, the Explo is already done the job.
Yeah, I mean, you're engaging into a 1v2, which is almost never good, right? At a base level, right? You don't really know where the Exploser is, but turns out that they were there because you weren't able to push up far enough, and you can't, right, with a splash. And you don't have the support of the rest of the team. You don't have the support of a special. So I don't know. I probably would have liked to see a little bit more defensive play there because, again, at this point, we're probably still not in a rush. We're starting to think about mid control more, like in terms of like a turf war timescale, but I don't think we're in a rush to take back mid. As long as we do it at some point within the next minute, we're probably looking pretty good. So there's some wiggle room here, and we can wait for teammates to come back in off of respawns, wait for specials to come up online before actually pushing into mid and trying to break that. It looks rough, right? But by the same token, I personally don't see a reason why we can't wait.
Mm-hmm. It's still a 3v3. You've got plenty of time, and one other thing I want to point out is that the reflux, like, they're there with you, and sometimes I, as a frontliner, get into this headspace where I'm like, okay, I've seen a teammate with me in the last second and a half. That means that if I dive into the enemy base, I am going to be protected by that teammate, and they're going to do their job. And that's something that gets me killed a lot. The reflux on the left-hand side doesn't have a great angle to be able to use their range from where they're standing. Because, like, if they're up here, like, and you're engaging in the mid, what can they actually do to help that? They'd have to, like, drop down off this ledge and back up to be able to see the splatter shot from there. Or they'd have to go up over the top and expose themselves to the Explo. They're kind of camped out on the left-hand side here waiting for more opportunities. Because there's not a lot of forward momentum they're able to get. There's not a lot that they're able to paint from here. So they're also kind of in a holding pattern. And so it may be that, like, you saw this and thought, oh, we're going to have help here. But at the moment, that's not the case.
Okay. As you said that, I just thought of maybe an interesting way to look at this. And look at... Honestly, it could probably be generally applied to most Splatoon things in general. I think in order to move forward, you probably need to have either line of sight or range control or map control via ink on the ground. And if you have neither, then it's probably not in your best interest to assert the issue, right? Because as I was talking about earlier, you have at the point where you have neither, you have no idea where the enemies are. And even if you don't know where they are and wanted to push forward, you don't have anything that can react to what's going on, right? So to your point about this reflex not being able to actually see into mid from where they're currently positioned, you're entering into a 1v2, right? As opposed to it might be a 2v2, even if the reflex was on the other side of the ramp or on top of bridge or something like that, right? Where now all of a sudden the reflex can pop out, try to get a pick onto the explosher if the explosher is trying to, focus down on you underneath there. So I feel like having one or the other is probably vital in order to actually be successful. Whether you have some range control that you can actually adapt to noticing that an enemy is in a specific position, or having ink control and knowing that there aren't enemies around and that you actually are safe pushing forward.
Or obviously something like a numbers advantage that would allow you to push into a fight that would normally be losing, but a trade helps your team anyway, and so you keep going.
In the context of the game, when it's Rainmaker, when you're like ahead already and just trying to like keep trades and stalling out the game or something, yeah, maybe. But I think that's more of a contextual point than a
right, and not in this
rule.
context, obviously, because we have even numbers anyway.
Right.
But the point also being that a numbers advantage makes it more likely you win the fight, because if you take the fight from off angles, the opponent is getting shot with double the DPS and can only deal DPS to one target at a time in most cases.
The other thing, though, about that numbers advantage is that I think there might be a little bit more left over there on that train of thought, especially coming from Splatoon 2, where we had ink armor. Remember, ink armor is not in the game, right? You have a certain number of health, and there's nothing you can do to actually change that. And so going for like a 2 or a 3v2 is probably more risky than it would have been in Splatoon 2 if you also had armor. So I think just taking a fight because you notice that there's a squid advantage in something larger than a 2v1, right? Taking a fight because you know you have a squid advantage up on the map might not always be the best, depending on positioning.
Yeah, I can agree with that.
Like KBot mentioned before, I think going right and getting the line of sight on the expo might have been a better play for me.
Are you guys able to see my mouse, by the way? I don't know if this is on screen. Okay, cool. Yeah, so we're talking about this area here, and yeah, then you would be able to see the Explo coming in. And I understand like why you're avoiding this area right now, because they did just put a Booyah Bomb on it, and for all you know, someone is sharked through and is using that as a smokescreen. But we have to get control of that eventually. Excuse me.
In my mind, you can sit pretty far back and just shark there for a bit if you're not feeling confident. Because if somebody does decide to drop off of that bridge, you have a burst bomb and a main weapon that will be able to shoot at them, and they won't be able to react in time. So I don't think you need to push up super far or even need to be on top of the bridge, especially while you're waiting on your other two teammates to respawn. But I think looking in that general vicinity, especially in the world where the reflex is covering under the bridge and the left side, like over top of the bridge, having that other area of protection is going to be a little bit better to hold the line a little bit more and make it so that your teammates have safer respawns, and then you're able to build up your specials for a re-engage.
Mm-hmm. And we did see the reflex earlier trying to put a curling bomb across this bridge here. So that would tell me that there's at least something going on over here that they were at least trying to stop from happening. So you being over here might have, given maybe them an angle here and you an angle here, and maybe that helps. But hard to say. It's all speculation. Alright, so we see a player, probably the Explo here, attacking your teammate. You throw a burst bomb at that to try and support it, but the rain's in the way, and if you were to stay in and try and engage on them, that's probably not a winning fight, so I can agree with backing off here.
The last option right now is dropping.
Mm-hmm.
That is the, like, unless there is a bomb and there is literally no way for you to go, I don't think dropping there at all as well. In fact, I mean, maybe I think sitting up there for a little while longer is nice, especially if you get enough charge for a crab tank. Being in that top position might be nice to have, because you have line of sight, and so that if an enemy player decides to push forward, you know, you're going to be able to have a lot more impact with the crab up there.
But it ends up working out. We move from over there
because is this a pre-hammer patch or post-hammer patch? Either way, the hammer's useless, but
Post-hammer. The hammer actually works now.
Well, it actually works when it's not just a tool that's used because the player wants to run forward.
Yeah,
I'm getting a lot of value off of it.
There are definitely some hammers that I have seen that were activated more effectively than the ones that I have seen here. It seems like the player is popping them, assuming that it's going to make them invincible as they push forward.
That is a very nice way of saying they're inting.
Not inting, uninting, but still feeding. That's probably where we would classify that. But in any case, so the thing about the top right here that I feel like might be influencing Kiwi, and correct me if I'm wrong here, is that you threw a burst bomb at the X-Blow over there earlier, right? So that's information you've given the enemy team on your position, and maybe you're rotating over to this side because they might expect you on the top right, and then when you show up someplace else, that's a surprise. Is that more along the lines of what you're thinking?
Yeah, I feel like it's easier to drop from the left now that they don't know I'm going there.
So, I mean,
and I like that you take the ramp down also, because that maintains your stealth in the ink.
The question for me is, when are you going to get crab and where are you going to pop crab? Because if you're planning on pushing underneath into mid, your crab is going to have significantly less value than if you were sitting on top of the bridge with the crab. So maybe we'll see how the rest of this plays out and when you decide to actually use your crab. But I'm just thinking, like, okay, especially on this map, high ground is going to have so much more of an advantage for crab. So anytime you can try to utilize that to your advantage, probably the better. And in this instance, right, we don't have mid for ourselves, so playing even more conservatively and trying to use the crab as a tool to break back in might be worthwhile, especially since now, maybe for the first time in the game, we finally have all 4 members on the front lines.
For sure. I've just been informed that the link that I put out on Twitch was incorrect and didn't have the underscore in it, so it's sending people to a different channel.
No!
So let me go really quickly and just correct that in the tweets. So that we're not sending... People found it anyway, you know, but don't want to make it a little bit more difficult for everybody. Here we go.
I would say farming crab in this position might be a bit difficult, knowing that all the spawn and paint got taken up.
Yeah.
I mean, it depends on a lot of things, and obviously I haven't watched enough perspective gameplay to know exactly how much paint you're going to need visually for the crab. And I'm not fully suggesting that you should just sit around and wait to build special, but it is the conservative option, right? As opposed to trying to dive in to make something happen. So it's an option worth considering, I think.
And this is a map that's very narrow, and so if you do get boxed in, it can be hard to find those patches of ink. But this is a place where I might think, like, maybe this is actually a situation where you want to leave less of your base painted so that you can get that crab more easily. In a situation where you're being forced back, because you do leave some there, but random solo queue teammates might fill that in a little bit more than coordinated teammates will. You know, in Splatoon 2, you'd leave that for someone to be able to farm missiles at the end if something was going wrong. But here, you know, you might just have someone who's like, I really want this Zipcaster right now, and there's not a lot that you can do to stop them from taking it. So that might be a thought about how you might be able to approach it and come out with a crab. But you do end up finding an opening here with your main weapon. And so you're able to take them out. And then from here, there's only one up. There's only the splatter shot. So there's a couple of schools of thought here. Something that I saw in a FLC say with a Rainmaker match that he was watching in, I believe, the Japanese Rainmaker Cup that happened recently, was that right now what you want to be doing is get a frontliner in their base now, like close enough to have control of their bridge immediately, so that when they spawn back in, you already have control of that, and that other people can fill in the rest of mid in the meantime.
If I have it my way, that frontliner is the 52.
Mm-hmm. And I think that makes the most sense given, this comp, but also this is not necessarily a coordinated environment, and it might It might want to be Kiwi, given that Kiwi's cracked and would be like more successful than the average human at pulling that off. But I definitely think you can take a little bit of time right now to be painting at least to get to crab, but then you want to be getting that crab as far forward as you can to be able to hold with it when you get there. One thing to think about, though, is that this splatter shot is still, their position is relatively unknown, and we've got to be a little careful about how we push up just so we don't get sharked.
I think I prioritized the wrong thing here by trying to check if the splatter shot was sharking, and it took too much time to get to mid, possibly.
Yeah, it does feel like now that you're up here in this strong position, you've taken long enough that they're able to contest you again. It feels like we didn't gain as much map control from that fight that we won as we could have, because we spent as long as we did kind of painting around in mid here. So it might have been the right call to actually prioritize your power position earlier, because you did check the corners and everything, but maybe the shot was sharking over here, right? Maybe they were sharking over here. Chances are they're probably not going to stick around if they see a 1v4 situation.
Yeah.
So it's solo queue, and anything can happen, but the smart call for them is probably for them to back up and wait for the rest of their team to come in, because otherwise they sacrifice a lot of control. So I'd probably just take advantage of that opportunity to push up where you can. And if pushing up means you want to be over on this side, then you want to kind of bias yourself towards being up here as soon as possible. Like, one potential disadvantage I could see with taking the left-hand side is that from that left-hand side, it's harder for you to rotate to this position where you actually want to pop the crab from, because it just takes longer to get there. And that's not to say that, like, never take left. Just, that's something to weigh when you are making the decision. This feels really difficult to hit someone with.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, like, even just a little bit further forward on the bridge here, and you can maybe hit around it a little bit more easily. You've got better angles. But perpendicular to this wall, I don't know if you're going to get much out of that.
How about looking at it? I mean, this looks difficult for crab unless you are literally on, like, where you are right now on the enemy side of the map, right? Like, on that perpendicular bridge section, it looks like if you're not there, it's going to be difficult to find an angle on opponents that are below you because there's ground in the way. So I don't actually know what the response is there for crab specifically, because obviously, like, you don't have a lot of map control here. The other front line isn't really pushed up, and it goes down behind you somewhere. I guess they lost a fight underneath the bridge. On that note, I don't even know what value the Stamper has got in this match. So it just, I mean, maybe we're using the ZR button to just look for turf forward and make it a little more annoying for the opponents. Although that said, you're giving specials over, but your opponents are going to get specials anyway, because by the time the next fight comes around, and by the time that your teammates respawn, so I don't know. I could go either way. Maybe I'm just not a fan of crab right here.
Yeah.
As long as you don't die, I feel like it's not all lost. And it's nice that you're making them take as long as they are to get across this bridge. I think that's a huge plus of that play. Because, like, yeah, your teammates just kind of went 2 down. And there's not a lot you're going to be able to accomplish when that's happening. But you were able to make the opponents take longer to lock you in. And so now they're not going to have as much mid control as this game reaches this crucial moment. And as long as you stay alive, you can probably get another crab by the time the game is about to end. And at that point in time, you just hope it's a really impactful one.
Why is the reflex going down up there? Ooh.
What are your thoughts on staying sharked here? Because my initial thought would have been, let's get some paint from down here and use that to get closer to crab.
I would say I'm a bit panicked right now since I don't have mid control going into the last 40 seconds. And the only way to salvage that is to try to find a pick.
Gotcha.
I'm not too close to crab either, so.
Here's my thought. Oh, yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, KBot.
The first piece of advice is from the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, don't panic. That's the last thing you want to do, because the second you start panicking is the second you start making poor decisions. Now, obviously, I understand that is much easier said than done, but I watch it so often where players try to make the clutch play at the end of the game because it's what they think is the only option available, because their brain is panicking, that it's virtually impossible to get them to actually make the right call at all. So obviously, like, half of a joke, but by the same token, don't panic. Anyway, Jen, what were you going to say?
So my thinking here, like, if you start painting the left-hand side, what might happen, because the only player on their team that can possibly hit you from there is the Explo, unless there's someone who happens to be sharking down here, and, like, why would they want to do that? That's not been a priority that they've shown all game. It was just the reflux that was hiding out here a little bit, and they were focused more on bridge. It seems like the enemy team is really tunneling pretty hard on bridge. So chances are relatively low if you start painting this down here that there's someone sharking it and they get you. And what might happen is the Explo sees you painting over this, and they're like, ooh, short-range weapon, shoot at that. And maybe that takes some of the pressure off of this player. So it's either they look at you and you back up and you relieve pressure, or you get some more paint for a crab tank and then see your teammate is dead and go, well, here we go again, and you back up.
I mean,
that is probably
the posture. I don't like the positioning of either of your two teammates right now, because they're starting to push forward while there are 2 members of the enemy team on bridge, and at least one of them is the Explo. Is the other one of them the machine?
Looks like a machine.
Looks like it. Yeah, like that's Explo and machine on top of the bridge, and they are currently trying to push through enemy ink. Like, that's just a losing fight for them. So,
ooh.
And of course, here's where the splatter shot is.
When did they get there?
Yeah, when did they get there?
That took me by surprise.
There should be no universe where they're at.
Oh, you know what? I see what happened. So right here, there's a suction bomb that goes on the bridge, right? That's the shot. And during this time where we're painting the sponge, that's when the shot is sharking into that position. They're using the paint from the bomb, because you can see when you come over the top here, there's unbroken green paint across the bridge now, when before there was some orange up there that was stopping them. So that bomb paints their way, and then they just shark into this position and wait for you to pop up.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing you can do here is play more, like, arguably play more conservatively, but I think this is just a good sharking play from the shot rather than, like, something you can consciously try to adapt to. Like I said, the only thing is, like, oh, hey, maybe bridge, there is an ounce of blue ink here. That means there might be an enemy player here. So, like, you know, maybe you go around playing shell-shocked, But otherwise, like, maybe you just like, all right, well, good play from them, and we move on.
Really quickly, a question from chat for Kiwi. Here's the real important question. What color flag does 99 freshness give you on the menu?
From 50 up, it always gives you a golden flag.
There you go. There's your answer. All right. One thing that I'm actually thinking about with my suggestion to paint this up, and like, again, I did not know that the shot was there. I would have been surprised by this, but you've got paint up until this line right here. If you're over here, you actually have this wall for cover from this player if you're in this position. So
I mean,
you actually might have been the tiniest bit safer, and you'd have right side peek. They'd have to paint a path over here, and you'd have a little bit more time to respond to that. But
on paper,
again,
unless the Explo and machine turn on you from their top ridge,
right,
and you push too far forward, right?
Mm-hmm. So that's maybe an idea there, but again, we didn't know that they were there. That this is just something that takes you by surprise. I wouldn't worry too much about it. I noticed that like you actually instinctively moved in this direction to get away from them. Okay, so this is not the map state that you want to see at 30 seconds left at the end of the game. Whoa, come on, back up. There we go.
Yeah, it'll be really hard to salvage.
This is so you got a teammate who's in Narnia.
Oh no! Oh.
And then you've got two teammates who are respawning and aren't in position to do anything yet. Man, that is a sea of enemy ink that they are stuck in.
Yeah.
So
Vertical surfaces do not count on Turf War or football.
correct. See. Okay, so it looks like you're pre-firing, expecting this player to push up here, and then they just take an angle that you're not covering, and you're forced to left side peek them to get them here. Given their position, and especially since we're getting pressure from above, I don't know if we can see that pressure from above, but there is a point sensor that gets placed here, so we know they have control of that.
I mean, arguably, unless everyone wins their 1v1 here, the game's lost.
My thinking is, you know you've got a teammate right here. You could probably leave this player here for 1 second and see if this player decides to go after them and try and finish it.
Maybe.
But, yeah, we do have to force fights at this point, just because otherwise there are too many enemy players contesting the paint that we put down. One other thing that I just want to kind of speed run through it, and I'll probably like put it on faster speed or something to watch through. But I want to see if, because every fight that we've taken so far has been one that we were pretty much on our own. Some of that is that, you know, our teammates are down, but I'm thinking like, is there a way that we could have dove in there with our teammates and potentially, you know, save them in some engagements? Because a piece of advice I've been giving a lot of people recently is like, if you've got a teammate who's feeding, well, you got two options, right? And I'm not saying that that's necessarily exactly what's happening here, but let's take the case of like, this player is just going to sploosh their way into every single engagement. They're just going to hold forward immediately. They're going to run it down. How do you play around a player who is, you know, programmed to do that? Well, you've got two options. You either let them go in and die and play the entire game at a 3v4, or you see if there's anything you can do to make their fight more likely to succeed, and maybe they actually trade, and now you're in a 3v3. And so my thinking going back through this is there a way that you could have looked for engagements your teammates were starting before they went down? Because you're playing smart, you're playing defensively, you're playing to protect your life. And what's happening is that while you, a very capable player, are staying alive, you never have the support to do anything that you need to do, which is get the crab tank up onto top mid. You get like one opportunity to do that in the entire game. And so I'm wondering, like, is there maybe a way that you could have looked for where teammates were going, and you could have maybe like tried to follow up with them?
To answer the question in first half of memory, I don't think there is, because your two teammates go on staggered, like, and you start to go on staggered respawns almost instantly, and I think it persists for the first half of this game. So I don't actually, like, it's a good point, right, to be like, okay, well, what can we do here, maybe? But I don't know if there is there actually is anything.
Mm-hmm. So, like, the 52 rolls out on the right here, and that's where they go down. I don't know what they did, though, because they're way up on the bridge already. So maybe they just didn't have time to get a wall up in time. I don't know. Yeah. And the fact that somebody decides to go up and push this after the 52 already went down there, that's probably a mistake. Because you're too far down to support them. This player is too far away to support them. So them peeking this feels like they just didn't notice that their teammate ouched. And here you definitely do go to bat for your teammate, and you throw stuff. So here we get one. With this fight, if you may, one possible option also with this fight that I didn't think about is you've got a teammate on the far right. If you this way, they might actually collapse on that player with you. Sometimes like a single well-timed this way that from someone who hasn't been this way spamming the whole match can actually make a difference.
I think that play was actually winnable if I took it differently.
Already, now we're staggered. Now you try to go in and get punished for it. So now you're the one that's staggered and you have to come up with the respawn. Which, like, again,
and then the
kind of
52 staggers
because it's Turf War within the first minute and a half.
Mm.
But now the 52 goes down again. Now, like, where that 52 goes down is probably where it starts mattering a lot more. Because if you keep up this stagger, now the stamper goes down again, right? If you keep up this stagger, you're probably not going to be completely settled by the time that you want to take this, like, last 30 seconds.
And then another thing about this is that we've got everyone in the same place. Knowing that, one, you were already down here. Two, that your teammates were up on the bridge and have been pushing this the whole time, and that the opponents have been looking at this the whole time. Even though your optimal crab tank positioning is to be up here, maybe there's a world where the better option is actually for you to flank underneath and try to support this play from an off angle instead of putting yourself in the same place when the window of opportunity for this fight that they're taking has already left, and like that you're behind the play that they're trying to make.
Yeah.
That's
maybe
the most that I can think for how you might have been able to follow up on it. Because at this point, you're going to get pushed back. This is just inevitable. And then you go over here, you get sharked, and now it's the last 30 seconds, and they've got about 75% map control, and your team is staggered. So I think that was those were about the only two ways in, and, you know, sometimes it do be like that.
I feel like it was a lot of the small mistakes that added up. If I did,
it is really valuable, I think, to look at this and think about, you know, what is it I could have done better? Because that question is always going to lead you to become better at the game. But it's also worth noting, like, there were definitely small mistakes on your part and very large mistakes on the part of others on the team as well.
I mean, let's keep playing. I want to see the score lines here. Here we go.
I feel like that's the nature of solo queue, though.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, missed it.
Oh. Also partly covered by chat, and I can't see it from the screen share.
Oh, yeah. So, Reflux 125, Kiwi 642, the 52 was 652, and the Stamper was 251. So,
Yikes.
some fairly negative KAs on the parts of the midline there. The 52 was definitely getting some work done, but it didn't look like they were getting a lot of support, maybe because they were putting themselves in really aggressive positions.
And the Stamper was not valuable pretty much at all.
They didn't paint as much.
I think if you're playing the Stamper there, they should have painted more, and they should have probably had more specials, because I think you actually confirm in solo, you're confirming more kills when you have Zipcaster, when you can be more creative with it, rather than trying to just dive in and use stuff with your main weapon all of the time. So that's probably the answer there. But.
This is another match where I got locked out hard.
Okay. Let's have a look. Yeah, Hammerhead Bridge locked out. What are you talking about? That never happens there.
Never.
This map is actually pretty good for solo queue if you can find mid control early in the game.
Yeah, that's the big thing. As soon as you get mid control, there are two ways that the opponents have to come out, and they're pretty close to each other. And so you just shoot those.
Yep.
And that's map design, baby.
If I see this in the Splatfest rotation, I'm playing it.
Just going all out for the breakthrough.
Normally I'll let my teammates take it, but they all went forward, so...
Hello, crab. Is popping your crab in response to the right play?
My thinking is this. Missiles have just been fired. They know where everybody is. Your teammates are zoned out over to here. Because you've spent 20 seconds painting up base, now the opponents have been able to take more advanced positions, and they've been able to, 4v3 bully your teammates away. Dropping down here seems really risky, especially when you know that there's a splash wall in front of you. It might just be like another case of like dropping off a ledge too hastily without knowing what's below it.
Yeah, that first long throw drop looked like you were on autopilot.
Yeah, I didn't take my time to look what's under me.
But like, there at the end, now that you're back up a bit, John, right behind this wall, my question is, why don't you drop behind, like without the crab? Drop off to the left, cut them off, and I think they won't be looking at you, and you can probably get them.
Like, drop into mid?
Just drop right here and come up the ramp behind them. Because you'd have the crabs back that way, and anybody who's looking at you won't have an angle because of this wall.
Still all with your main weapon. I don't think you get into the crab because you're vulnerable from the backside, and you have no idea who could be behind you in mid. So as long as you're more mobile and flexible, I think you can create more havoc, because those two teammates are now going to look like they're shooting over at that player on the right side. So I think if you just drop here and go full on aggro, you actually pick up the picks. And the crab tank in theory is easier to kill unless it goes into ball form. And if it goes into ball form, then it's virtually meaningless until it comes out of it.
It does look like the crab is turning already to look in this direction, so you might not be able to like go head on against it, and it also has this box to back up around, which is annoying, but it's definitely an idea. And I think the crab being boxed in here is definitely likely to get chased down and flanked somehow. Ends up just getting shredded instead.
I'm going to step away for a moment. There, I'll be back.
All right, sure thing. So, oops, that's the wrong button. There we go. So we clean all of this up. There's a teammate who picks your splatter shot as their Zuka-ing, and then you throw a burst bomb at that fight. One unfortunate thing about this, I think, is that you and your teammate both end up going the same way. So this player is looking in this direction already as you try to drop on them.
Yeah.
So because you're not at an off angle at all, they don't have to adjust their aim much, and they can... Oh, they actually don't end up getting... sorry, it was this player who gets you here. So you actually are able to get that pick as a trade. But so it's 4v3. It's 4v2. We drop over the ledge. We get this one pick, but now it's me and a ballpoint, and there's at least one other player looking at me. They do play this really smart. Like, we have to give them credit for moving in this direction, because if they just come around the corner, you shark them, and they know you're here. So they instead take a really wide angle so they can see you. You commit and give away your position, and then you're like, oh, crap, and they are able to chase you down. So this is really well played from their splash. But I'm thinking, like, did we have to drop? Yeah, we probably did have to drop down to get that. But at this point, yeah, it's just kind of tough now.
They might have been able to just run it last instead of committing to this fight.
Yeah, you might be able to get away. Or another idea is they've turned their back to you to move in this direction. Maybe you just, like, run at them. Maybe you just, like, take the straight-on angle, no cover, no fanciness, and try to hit them before they turn around. That's one idea. Like, it would... Oh, God. Nope, don't do that. Don't do that. Hold on. Okay. So, like, they've turned around and gone this way. One spot of paint there, you stand about here, you're in range, and you can hit anything that's in this direction. And they have to do a 180 before they can hit you. So you probably have your aim on first, and you're just betting that there's nobody on the right-hand side, like there's not a squiffer looking at you or something.
Yeah, there's no other shooter to cover for him.
Mm-hmm. So that's also an option. But yeah, it is just kind of unfortunate that we ended up down that many players before the fight started, and they were able to collapse on that. Okay, so it looks like we're moving forward. We've got, you know, enemy team down 3. You see a teammate up here, and so now we're gonna control a lot of this as fast as we can while still moving forward. And 2 members go down. Ooh.
I was hoping for a pick there, but they got away from it.
So one idea that might work here, because I don't think there is anybody who actually knows you're here. And, like, there's practically no way in the game for anyone to hit this corner without actually walking into your line of sight. So this might be a spot where you can just shark for a second, figure out someone's position before you try to engage on something. Because that feels like a really slow play, but for one thing, this is actually not a bad super jump spot if somebody comes in to try and help you with this. And then maybe you can sandwich the enemy team between here and their spawn. So that's a more of an aggressive, like, wild kind of play. But I think a disadvantage of this play here is you get someone's attention with burst bombs before you try it. And so now there's a whole bunch of paint. There's been a curling bomb thrown here, cutting off your escape. You're going to have to paint your feet somehow to get back over to the left again to that safe corner. And with this crab, we don't actually know exactly where people are. We know there's someone in mid here, but they just curling bomb out, and somebody has just dropped down to get behind you. They're just swarming you now. So this is a case where I think if we're going to go for an aggressive play, we need to have shots on instantly as soon as we trigger the crab. And because they're able to get away and we are not able to hold the aim on them, honestly, it might have actually been more successful, that flank play, with the main weapon first, because the crab does slower DPS at first than your main weapon does. So maybe the idea there is don't throw the burst bombs, shark your way up to here, spot that player in mid, laser them, and then pop the crab to keep yourself safe from their teammates trying to trade back. Maybe that's something that works time-wise. I don't know exactly how successful that's going to be at the level you're playing at, but those are a couple of alternative ideas to maybe consider. And I can't say that, this definitely would have worked better because I'm not in this game and I'm just looking at what did happen. But these are some ideas to maybe brainstorm, like, how could I have played this differently?
I would say there was too much enemy ink and I didn't have enough information.
Yeah, that might be it. And something that can happen is, like, if you sit here and let them get a little bit of mid control but then push forward, that does give you their backs. And so if you're able to spot when your teammates are starting to engage, then you can execute the flank. So that might be a way to go for the play. Because from here it looked pretty unsupported. It looked like nobody was really trying to get in from mid while you were doing this. Let's see. So we set up in here. You've got an inkjet and a player who's down. So I guess you're trying to maybe flush them out into the inkjet. Is that part of the thought process?
I was trying to get the players distracted by the inkjet.
Gotcha. Unfortunately, the inkjet just happens to go down right when you start making that play.
But it was more of a gamble to instantly pop crab there.
Mm-hmm. And another thing that I'm noticing is that, like, right here, when you've got the 3-down situation, you take some time to move out and paint these areas around here. And I'm wondering, now that I'm seeing how this ends up playing out, if it might not have been a better idea, since the front line, the first person that the enemy team is going to run into, is so far forward, if it might not have been a better idea to actually try and reunite with them in mid as quickly as possible so that you're together when the fight happens.
I agree. Speed is really important in these plays.
Because, like, this does give you the ability to get some paint control in mid, but once they get mid, like the proper mid and not this pit area, you're just suddenly cut off at a disadvantage and you have no escape routes. So the play might have actually been to support the player who is up ahead. And that's something that we saw also with the Eel Tail game, where when you got your 3-down situation up on the bridge, the rest of your team was pushing up over the top of bridge, and you spent some time checking those corners before you went to support them, and by the time you got to them, they were already down. So it might be a pace of play sort of thing, like when you're getting that advantage that you want to be pressing for the zone control first and the paint control second. Zone control being if the opponents walk into this space they're getting shot at, because that's what really enforces the paint control. They can turn the paint control over as soon as they have zone control, but if you keep the zone control, your paint control can come later.
That's one of the points that I took away from watching Area Cup as well it was Sunday. The team that ended up winning was playing double splash Tetra Flingza. Holy cow, they moved so fast. They were all over the map one way or the other. I mean, obviously it's clicks, so he's just gonna roll around the map 4 times and suddenly he's on the other side of mid. But regardless, right? I mean, not only does clicks move in, but also one of the splashes is almost immediately there to try to support. Because in these players as a unit are just playing so quick or so much up in your face, pressure, even despite playing these splashes that also can get plenty of value sitting back, being much more methodical and playing a little bit more like a backline, midline, something.
Yeah, and I think that's also backed up by the Rainmaker Cup results where it's double splash, Tetras, and Machine, I think it was, on that comp that they were running, where they're just putting someone on the enemy bridge as soon as anybody wins a fight. They're just all the way up there already, and they already have basically control over 60% of the map, because the rest of the map that's behind them is under their passive control at that point. It's under the control where you can't get to it, therefore you don't have it. So that ends up getting collapsed on, and so then what happens? Then your teammate probably dies because they just boxed themselves in the corner. Yep. And you've got a teammate who is doing turf war things, and they are trying to invade the enemy base and hope that nobody notices them. So if things go too badly in your base and you know the positions of all the enemy players, I wouldn't necessarily rule out the idea of jumping to this player. Just got to watch out for respawns, I guess. But this is a low percentage play. We'll want to keep tabs on that and see how that pays off. They are still alive. Oh boy, that's a crap. Interesting. Okay, so my thinking here was you're going to just like beeline the ledge to get something in between you and the crab as quickly as possible. And then as soon as you drop, you're going to beeline this corner to put this between you and the crab. And it's interesting that you kind of delay a little bit there. Are you expecting maybe that the crab is going to pre-fire that spot, assuming that's where you're going to go, and that you're baiting that and then going afterward? It ends up working out.
I think I'm like trying to be careful of opponents down in bottom left.
Ah, okay.
As I run away.
One other thing to think about is that you're marked, and when you put yourself over a ledge, and they know that you've put yourself over a ledge, now your back is to the wall, and that's why they make an aggressive play like this. Something that I like to do when I'm marked is to move towards one direction as the mark is ending to make opponents think I'm there, and then just go straight in the other direction and try to hit them from another side. Because they think, oh, this player is probably going right, and then if I can get around on the left and actually catch that player who's looking for me, that's something that might work. But this player was clearly like looking for you here and ready for it, and popped the crab specifically in response to it. And you do outmaneuver them to get to this position here. And you're able to get away for some time, but then they bring in the cavalry and collapse. So I definitely think here the drop off the ledge is probably something to try and avoid. And dropping off of ledges, you know, big movement commitment. We talked about that earlier, so that might be a pattern that's coming up. But you have numbers advantage, at least conditionally. Like, I don't know exactly when everyone's spawned in. I haven't been keeping track of those timers in my head just yet, but they have a player more recently down, and so the play right now might be strength in numbers, especially since you're marked, so that you don't isolate yourself. Because it's really easy when you are isolated on a map this small for them to notice that you're isolated, because they only have to pay attention to two things. Okay, so we see how this goes. And, like, most players, to be clear, would have just died to the crab. Like, this is really, really good mechanical play to get yourself out of that situation, but there's just nowhere to go from here. You're just kind of stuck because they have mid, and that's the only place that you can run to. So all you can really do is hide at this point. Hide and fight. Or, I don't know, maybe try to look for a jump out, because this is a point in the game where you might want to do that. You were saying?
not to crap on or disrespect you, Kiwi, or to disrespect anyone else, but I think this is the something that a lot of higher level players get away with too frequently, is they make one silly mistake, like dropping there is probably not a good idea while you're marked, right? And then you're able to get away with it because you can just out mechanic your opponent and dip and dive your way around the crab, right? Which, for all intents and purposes, I mean, the crab itself, right, is in close quarters probably pretty easily to dive around, but for all intents and purposes, you should probably be dead if your opponent was, you know, actively watching and was on the same mechanical level as you. So making sure that, and then what happens is that you build up the habit of the fact that, oh, I can just drop and I don't have to think about this because, and if someone is going to approach me, I can just get away. But in reality, if you're facing a similarly skilled opponent, they'll probably actually be able to have the advantage on you, even if you're dropping, because they know exactly where you are. They know exactly where you dropped, you are marked, all of those sorts of things, right? So it is good for you to get out, but also let's remind ourselves that you probably shouldn't be in this position in the first place because of that drop with the mark.
Mm-hmm. That's something that's... Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I do get away with it way too often.
Yeah.
I have a habit of dropping left a lot.
Something that Ham talked about, Hamrum from Siege, talked about in the top 500 video that I did for Splatoon 2 a while back, was that you always want, and I don't know if this was even in that video or if this was just a separate conversation we had while we weren't recording, but you always want to play the best Splatoon that you know, even if you don't have to in order to win. Because if you get used to taking advantage of other players' low-level habits or low-level, you know, lack of mechanics, that will work up until the point where you run into someone who doesn't make those mistakes, and now it's your liability instead of theirs. So that's something where if you spot yourself, like, I all the time I will look at my matches while I'm playing or while I'm VOD reviewing, and I'll be like, I shouldn't have won that. And I remind myself, like, don't be doing that even though it worked. So now we're 2 down with 40 seconds left. And we're about to be another down. And maybe another down.
Although,
not quite, but...
Pushed up very far. Wow, whoa.
What was that?
Is that the splash that's pushed up pretty far in green ink? Keep going.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. I think, no. Enemy splash is, I think, sitting right now in this puddle, unless it dropped back down. Or no, I think it rotated around and tried to go back down the ramp. Wait, what was that? Rewind for a moment. I swear there is somebody here. Where did they go? You see that shot? It was like, it's literally right where he was throwing the burst bomb. Somebody peeks their head up here.
Okay, yeah. Right here. This guy?
Yeah, that should be easy. I mean, it's easy if it's in a competitive setting, right? Where you can call out. It looks like they're one of the people that rotated around and tried to go back down the ramp. Okay. That's a little bit of an int.
My thinking is, I would prefer that you be helping your team push into mid right now. Getting control of this area of mid is going to let you, if you win a fight here with this much time left, that probably gives you the best shot of painting this side and as much as you can up in front in the last 10 seconds or so. I don't know if you win this game by just passively painting while your team distracts them in mid, especially since without you, your team is more likely to go down.
I mean, I wish you had crop right here. At this point, it's now or never. I don't know when you pop the last trap and how realistic that would have been. And now popping it down below when you're trying to find disengagement is not going to be incredibly valuable.
Did you say now or never on purpose?
I'm actually trying to work that into commentary more because we should start saying that more. Not every game, but we should start saying it more.
I 100% agree. All right. So yeah, I think one thing that I'm noticing is, in general, you're not taking fights with your team. And a lot of the time, I can look at this and be like, you are probably going to initiate fights smarter than most of the people you're going to be playing with because you're a top player. That's no affront to any of the teammates we've seen here. They are probably very above average Splatoon players to be being placed in a lobby with you in the first place. But on one hand, like, I would trust, an engagement you decide to take a lot more often than maybe some teammates. But if your teammates are going to start the fight before you can get there, there's already a fight started, and leaving it as like a 3v4 fight isn't necessarily going to help that any. Like, you're going to stay alive, but then that's just a 3v4. And you staying alive and staying away means that the other two players who are now engaged are in a 2v4 instead. So that might be contributing to the opponents being able to hold mid as hard as they have in these two matches. That your teammates are engaging, they're popping specials, they're in the middle of the map at important choke points. And usually when that's happening, you're trying to play very defensively, check corners, and protect yourself at the expense of protecting the teammates who are engaging in that fight. So maybe that's something to think about, and maybe that's something that is working in every other game, that because we're not seeing a win here, and we're not seeing like how this pattern of behavior usually plays out for the whole team environment. Maybe it is that if your team just chills for like 5 seconds and lets you do the thing you're trying to do, you just completely win a fight, wipe the entire team, and move forward. And it's more on your teammates for being impatient than it is for you for not being up there to support them. But there are some of these engagements where I, am looking at that thinking, what would I do in this situation? And I'm like, oh, I'm beelining to help them right now. And in a couple of these situations, you're running up and throwing burst bombs and being really supportive. In other situations, you're painting left pit on Hammerhead and then getting collapsed on afterwards once you have no teammates to help you. So I think that that's possibly something to think about and maybe look at the other games and consider for future reference.
Yeah.
And then the other one, again, is dropping over ledges is scary.
Yeah.
Maybe like pause a half second longer before doing so in future and be like, wait, am I going to die? I might die. Maybe not yet.
Is there a probability? I think is the better way. Look, it's like you don't know for sure, right?
Yeah.
And you won't know for sure unless there is no ink or there's no enemy ink around it. Then you're like, okay, I'm quite confident. But in this Ninja Squid meta, especially what we saw with that splatter shot, right on bridge. I mean, on Eel Tail, that was an insanely good play by the splatter shot, but arguably, something avoidable if you painted more, right? Which like means that you're being incredibly meticulous with painting, and I'm not blaming you, right, for dying this splatter shot, but it's something where that proves the point of like, hey, anything can happen even when there are slivers of enemy ink that you think are completely meaningless.
Yeah. And so I think the takeaway there is, if there's going to be a risk every time, sometimes you do have to go and take that risk. And I think the risk worth taking, rather than dropping yourself into an isolated part of the map, is to take the risk that your teammates have already decided to take, whether you liked them to or not. And that might be the one that's worth supporting in those cases. Because you're going in with a set game plan, like, I need to get the crab on top of bridge. I need to get mid control on Hammerhead. And those are goals that will definitely let you win the game in Snowball. And I think part of the reason that we're not getting to the point where we can do that is that our teammates are going down before it's happening, and there is possibly some support in these situations that could be provided to teammates if we hard engaged when we do have the advantage and fought with them. So that's where I'm at on it.
That's my current game strategy. I do prioritize my own positions and plays rather than watching out for my teammates.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's something I can work on.
Sometimes being the carry does not necessarily mean being the one on the front lines getting all the kills. A lot of times, actually, the carry comes from the person who's the glue that's holding the team together, that's forcing the team, or not forcing the team, but is giving the team one less objective or one less goal or one less thing to accomplish, right? Most notable example that I'm thinking of in my head while I'm saying all of this, Shaq on FT Win, right? He's there painting the exit path for Kyo 100% of the time. That's the only reason why Kyo loves playing with a guy, right? Is because he's painting the floor 100% of the time. He's playing K-Shot, which is like or at this time, right? Playing K-Shot, which is a weapon that most of the people would probably think is more of a Slayer role, but actually playing it incredibly supportively in playstyle. So anytime you can converge around one specific thing you want to accomplish, the better you can do. And that's exactly what we want to do in competitive settings, right? You want to be communicating with your team for everyone to be on the same page, to target a specific location or have a specific plan of action. And the more you can solidify those things if you're in a solo queue game, the better. And most of the time, if you're looking at it from a competitive player's lens, most likely it's not going to be you that's the shot caller, because everybody else also wants to be the shot caller, right? Everyone else also wants to be the one that's diving in and getting all of these kills.
It's a similar situation to like, have you ever watched like really, really little kids play soccer? It's really a fascinating like social environment, because what's happening is every single one of them wants to get to the ball and kick it. And the point in like young soccer metagame that really blows everything wide open is when you get a kid who learns to stand away from the ball in a position where if they get the ball, they can score. And then all you need to train everybody to do is pass the ball to that kid, and then you win games. And sometimes, like, you're the only person on your team who should be getting the ball because you can actually dribble the dang thing. But sometimes the rest of your team is just piling on the ball and like kicking it out of bounds, and it is really not going anywhere. And if you just uncrowd things a little bit and go and do the thing that they're not doing, but support them with it, then that might be what the team needs. So to bring this back around to Splatoon, if everyone wants to call the shots, then 4 different shots are going to be called. But if you look at somebody else's shot and go, okay, I can run with that, even if it's not the optimal play, even if it's not what you would be running with your competitive team, something that Shai said in the top 500 video that has also stuck with me and that I've reiterated a lot of times is making the wrong decision quickly is usually better than making the right decision but hesitating to do it. So if my teammate went and made a wrong decision, might be the right call to just dive in with him and be like, all right, buddy, we're in this together. Let's fix this problem. So consider that sometimes, especially with regard to situations where you have an advantage now and you need to keep the pace of play fast. Sometimes you might just need to work with a teammate on a play that they didn't quite choose quite the right way, but that you can maybe salvage. In that way, you can use your superior mechanical skill to, instead of make your own, hyper aggressive plays that might not pan out, you can use your mechanical skill to support somebody else's hyper aggressive plays that might pan out now that you can save them from doing that. So, hopefully that's some kind of helpful, and I haven't just been rambling on for the last few minutes on that particular subject. So, do you have any? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Commitment and speed is pretty important.
Do you have any questions or any like ideas you'd like to pose? Is there anything that you'd like to just say about what we've talked about already?
Not particularly.
Okay. So I would just like to give a huge thank you to both Kiwi and KBot for coming on the stream today. I think it's been hugely educational for me, and also undoubtedly for the stream to hear all of our different perspectives on this. I'm really looking forward to seeing how Kiwi is able to do it at this Splatfest, because they're approaching this from a very interesting like angle of I want to be the best at this particular thing, solo queue Turf War. It presents some interesting problems to solve that you don't see in coordinated play and that you don't see in the ranked modes. And I think that makes it really interesting for us to learn more about the game works, to see how it works when you change the rules, how it works when there are certain things you can't rely on. And so good luck to you for your run at the Splatfest this weekend. I'm sure we'll all be watching with interest. If you want, really quickly, I think you should be able to drop your YouTube link in the chat. Actually, here's what I'll do. I'm just going to go here. I'm going to click this, and I'm going to copy and paste this into the stream.
There we go. That's huge.
That's problem solving right there, ladies and gentlemen. So go and check out Kiwi, because this was literally just a video from their stream or from their YouTube channel. So you can keep track of their progress towards this with interest. Is there anything in particular, KBot, that you would like to plug? I'm sure there are like a billion things that you could plug, but do you have a stream, or do you have a tournament you're working on that you want people to check out?
I actually don't have a lot off memory. Most of the time, or a lot of stuff I'm doing right now is just random commentary things here or there. So best place is that normally I retweet things on my Twitter. So if y'all have Twitter, KBot_273, feel free to drop a follow. But otherwise, I mean, do note that sometimes you'll get Splatoon ramblings, and other times you'll get ramblings for things like Omega Strikers or Collegiate Esports. It's kind of a mixed bag with whatever you're going to get from me. So if you're not into that stuff, then that's also fine. But yeah, thanks, Gemma, for having me on. It was fun. It's nice to sit down. I don't actually get the chance to, or I don't often prioritize watching a single player's perspective. Most of the time, I'm like almost exclusively watching the map, trying to pick up on things, patterns, and things like that. Hopefully, I was able to pose some discussions and insights, but like I said, you're probably honestly the better coach than I am. So yeah.
Flattery will get you everywhere.
You've been doing it for far much longer than I have, okay? You've been doing it for much longer than I have.
Well, thank you. I do appreciate that. And thank you so much, Kiwi, for subjecting your gameplay to the scrutiny of two players that you could probably 1v2.
Correct. Oh, you're not definitely. I mean, yeah. So I am like 0.5 of a player in any competitive lobby. So,
but I definitely really value the humility of top players who are willing to, you know, put their gameplay on display for us all to criticize, because that's something that I believe is really conducive to learning. Being able to at least listen to people who are saying that you did something wrong, it lets you at least think, did I really? And if you didn't, then you probably know that, but it can give you different perspectives. And I do really value the people who are willing to go and do that sort of thing. And, you know, maybe you're looking at this and quietly going like, okay, half of that was maybe a little bit correct. But I hope that you at least got some nuggets of value out of this experience, and I'd love to do more content with you in the future. So just let me know, and I'm just a DM away.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys analyzing my gameplay. It gave me a lot of things to like look into.
Awesome. All right, that's going to do it for our stream today. Thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in. I'm going to really quickly... Shoot, I normally have another window up where I'm looking for who the raid target is going to be, and I'm faster on the draw here. Here we go. You know what? Let's just go in raid FLC, right? It only makes sense.
Or FLC is live.
Oh, what was live?
Popgun's live with his podcast.
Oh, okay. Do I not follow Popgun? This needs to be corrected immediately. Yes, okay. We're going to go and raid Popgun so that I can go and follow Popgun when we get there. All right? For those who don't know, Popgun is a storyteller who drives the narratives of the low and mid levels of competitive Splatoon. He's someone who knows every single team that ever competes in low ink, basically, and their whole records. It's insane how much of a memory he has for that. And he's a very valuable tournament organizer and commentator on the direction that the competitive community is going. Highly, highly recommend the Popcast, which is what we are about to go and raid into right now. So go and drop him a follow if you are at all interested in competitive Splatoon and want to know anything about what is going on in it at the time. It is basically your weekly news on what's happening there, and it's a really, really good recap of everything that happened that week. So off we go, and we're gonna have to wait 10 seconds because that's the way the Twitch raids work. But that gives the YouTube folks time to hop on over if they want to join in the raid. So yeah, come on and let's go say hi to Popgun. School's out, everybody.